Greetings everybody, it's DJ here once again with some more reality synthesis manifesting tips. So today we're going to be talking about primary principles or identification, okay? This goes beyond the three principles to a degree, right? Of course the three principles still govern these phenomena, but we're going to be talking about how identification is the primary driving factor behind who and what you are and what you manifest in reality, okay? And we're going to be connecting this to the conscious mind, the unconscious mind, the so-called subconscious mind, internal, external reality, self-concept projection, and all of the fun stuff that we talk about here on reality synthesis. State coherency, state interferometry, all of the new things. If you're actually new here, I strongly suggest you go and actually watch my other videos, because there is a lot of background information that needs to be, understood if you really want to grasp what it is that I'm saying. Otherwise, if you're, someone who studied my stuff for a while and you've been, reading the articles on my site, then this shouldn't be too unfamiliar, but it's going to be getting into some new topics, okay? I've spent some time developing the theory since I've last uploaded, and we've come quite a long way since then. So let's get into some core principles here. First and foremost, the number one thing that we should always have when we're drawing ourselves into reference state, which is the ideal place, our end, right? Our end identification, our ideal identification, is to approach it from a place of pulling out of yourself. Now there's a technique that I developed called the spatial sense technique. I haven't taught this publicly yet, but I will in the future. This is about using your awareness to feel around you, if that makes sense. And you're projecting concepts and feelings into the outer reality, but in reality, the outer reality is also your inner reality, right? Because there's the internal, the external, the microcosmic, the macrocosmic. And so when we have this conjugate relationship between the inner and the outer world, we can use the outer world to affect the inner world without directly tapping into the inner world. For example, feeling abundance around you without telling yourself, I am abundant. You're using the external reality to become a source of internal concept, if you wish, and feeling, right? So for example, when we would be applying the spatial sense, we would be thinking of what we want as already around us in our environment, even though we don't currently have it, without telling ourselves we try and have it. So it's like we're changing our internal environment using the external environment. This is another way that we can also program, I hate using that word, but that's kind of standard terminology at this point, program what it is that we have as these main concepts as well. So for example, if you're trying to manifest money or a house, right? But instead of focusing on manifesting money in a house, you simply feel abundance around you. You feel the wealth, the wealth of potential and endless possibility, and that everyone around you is reflecting that potential into your life as well. So you see the good in everything and it comes back to you, right? This is a bit of a strange kind of idea to think about, because it's not internal work that we're doing directly, as in I am this, I am that, I have this, I have that. We're seeing what we want everywhere around us anyway within our awareness. And when we do this, we relate to it, right? We connect to that without having to directly, again, draw it into us, because there is the inner world and the outer world. So you'll also notice that when you do inner work a lot of the time, the outer world gets reflected. You'll see other people reflecting the thing that you're trying to tell yourself about. Usually. Not all the time, but a lot of the time that happens. Like for example, when I started making reality synthesis content, other people in my life started leveling up as well. And it was, I never told them, I never affirmed, I didn't do any kind of external reality work. It just happened. It just happened on its own. So the internal reality and the external reality are conjugates, just like the conscious and the unconscious mind, right? We use external reality to influence internal, and internal to influence external, right? And this comes from core identifications. There are multiple levels to this. I don't even know, but there's a lot of levels to this. When you go into the ancient spiritual texts, specifically you could say, a lot of the, like for example in the Bible, we have the three aspects of God, right? We have the Father, the Son, and the Spirit, right? Now, the idea behind this is that there are multiple levels of identification. There is corporeal identification, which is the identification with, the person you see in the camera. I'm looking at myself in the camera, and that's who I would identify as who I'm embodying, who I'm playing the role as currently, and I'm immersed in that experience. Think of it like this, right? Think of it like the real you is like in some kind of external reality. Imagine that the experience you're having is like a VR experience, right? and that what you're experiencing is like an absolute perfect representation of what the real world would be, but except the real world is outside of this. It's not actually like this, but just imagine this for a second, right, to get my analogy. The real you is outside of this, and the real you can have the awareness pulled out of this simulation, this, construct, and pulled back into the, I'm actually this. I'm not identifying as the person I'm perceiving reality as. So you almost pull out of yourself, and you draw your awareness back, and you disassociate in a way with your identification, right? You have, instead of like a laser focused kind of experience of reality, you kind of turn it into a bit of a spotlight, and you have that awareness of all of the parts of yourself, and you just pull it out. And when you're in this place, you're operating from core identification, which is I am. You know, the I am in the Bible, the real core essence of who and what you are and what you're capable of. The source of emanation. The uncaused cause, right? The principle which takes upon itself limitation. Technically, it's limitation. All identification is limitation. In fact, without limitation, nothing could exist. Existence is limitation because potential requires a process to unfold potential, right? So we have the one leading into the two. The unity of all things cannot pertain in existence in and of itself because it requires an aspect of, it requires an attribute in order to have an expression in reality. So we have principle, attribute, and then we have that attribute performing its process. And then from that process unfolding, proportionality comes into play, and then that produces comparison, right? Proportionality produces the experience of duality, and thus we have the conjugate principles relating, and then we have the 3 and the 5 come from that, and the 8 principles. It doesn't really matter about the process, but we have all of these pieces. We have all of these pieces coming together. We have the primary identification, we have the experience of the internal and the external as the 2 principles, the conjugate principles, and then we have how it is that we're embodying that state identification, right? Because remember, states are built out of identifications. States are conglomerations of identifications. And when we go back to the other videos, we have, concepts, feelings. These two combine and associate to produce context. And then context associates to build identifications, and then states are formed. And when you embody a state, you identify with the state, you play as that state, then you take upon yourself all of the limitations or the aspects that you've built as the I am, right? The core principle of emanationary process. All of the aspects of that you take upon yourself in the here and the now, and that's what you manifest. It's not about trying to think things into reality. It's about building a self-recursive circuit. It's about building a program that runs for you, that you play as. You're almost like building a character, and you're playing as that character, and that character has within it attributes that are attached to it. And when you actually embody that character in the here and the now, instead of trying to think I am that character, like there's a difference between thinking of I, and this is about Neville Goddard saying thinking of and thinking from. When you think from, you're playing as the character. When you're thinking of the traits of the character, right? So my character has this, I am this. That integrates that concept, but you're not playing as that character. Your body, your nervous system, your unconscious mind is where that is anchored in. When you play as the character, not thinking of, you automatically embody that trait, that concept, that idea that you want this character to have, the trait, the type of things that this character has within it, and the things that it does, and the things that come to it, what it is, what this character's embodiment would be like. When you embody that, then you take upon yourself those characteristics. Without even needing to try, you are automatically driven into the world. Because you are simply the aspect who takes upon yourself characteristics, okay, through this limitation process unfolding. That is really how manifestation works. It's not about trying to think differently and identify differently from the thought level. That is a part of it, because we must integrate concepts and characteristics that we do want. And when we think of those characteristics, we integrate them, but that also requires embodiment. So when you think all day, every day, all day, every day, all day, every day, hours and hours and hours and hours on end, you're building up enormous amounts of character traits in whatever state that you're interacting in. Because remember, states can interact from completely opposite corners. You can be in one state here and be perfectly fine, but then something reminds you of something that's connected to another state, and you go whoosh, and you completely lose all of your focus in this other state that's completely stable and coherent, and then you go wee, and then you're over in this who knows where other state with all sorts of negative connotations around these things, and all of a sudden you go from hero to zero, all of a sudden, instantly, without even trying. because there's an association, there's a feeling that is connected between these two, and that is state incoherency. That is causing you to jump between states and not integrate concepts correctly, right? Again, you could almost think of states as characters, right? So the goal of state coherency, which is about building state streaks and consistently embodying that state, and when I say embody, I'm talking about actually truly embodying. Not just thinking of, but thinking from and playing as that character. And when we do it in our imagination, we're doing it in our imagination to essentially simulate embodiment, if you wish. And that also has a way of, building up this coherency as well. It's really interesting because a lot of the time in our imagination, we can just hear someone say something once or twice or even 3 times, and after a couple of days of doing it, or even sometimes on the same day, you can have massive results. But there's also people who do this stuff. If you've ever been on the Neville Goddard subreddit, you'll see all these stories. People oftentimes, they affirm something in their mind, as that person, they embody that, they imagine that playing out. They hear the person they want saying the thing that they want. But then, the person that they have saying the thing that they want, they say it to someone else. They say it to another person. Like the SP confessing their love. Oh, they don't say it to you, they say it to someone else. Even though that's what you intended, why does that not happen? Well, the state that you're embodying is not giving you the feeling, the identification. Remember, the feeling, when I say the feeling, I'm talking about an intuitive knowing. Okay, I'm not talking about like an emotion. Neville Goddard himself said the feeling is not an emotion, so refuted, right? We're talking about an unconscious expression of intuitive sense, a knowing of who and what you are and what you're capable of. You can't really directly tap into this sense because it's not supposed to be. It's supposed to be an unconscious process that plays out automatically. It's like the basis of the state, and then that basis of the state has integrated within it the concepts that we consciously think of, right? But without this feeling that we're trying to generate, this knowing of who and what we are and what we're capable of, we will manifest experiences according to the concepts that we try and integrate. That will reflect the feeling of limitation that we have in that state. Very important to understand that, because there are so many people out there, so many people. In fact, there are more people out there who seem to think that this is how it works than anybody else. People who think that all I need to do is affirm what I want and it will happen the way that I want. That is completely incorrect. Completely wrong. And everybody who teaches it has no idea what's going on with this stuff. Zero idea in any way, shape or form. They're all incorrect, okay? You will find, if you truly want to understand this, you script out in your journal and you look at other people's experiences and you compare it, you will find that people who have false identifications and states that don't work for them and feelings that don't work for them, when they integrate these concepts, they manifest proof of the concept they're integrating, but it will come in a way that is going to confirm that intuitive sense of limitation. So it will come in a limited way that they will see proof of it as like a sign, or the full manifestation coming through for someone else. Or they will see someone getting something that they want. Some way, shape or form, right? It will manifest, but it will not manifest the way they want. So I have no doubt that when you affirm things all the time, when you visualize and you do all these imaginary scenes, you can manifest that way. Absolutely, undoubtedly. Just like when people imagine, $100 bill, picking up, $100 off the ground. And yet, almost everybody who does this only picks up $1 or maybe $10. They don't pick up $100. I don't personally know anyone who's done that. I haven't done it. So why is that? We imagine $100, why do we not get what we want? Why? Because the intuitive sense underlying that concept is not compatible with the desire. Okay, the baseline reference state that you're embodying requires a certain level of coherency for that crystallization of that pathway to occur where you get the full manifestation. And that almost always only comes from having a feeling that is compatible. In other words, you have to truly embody the feeling, the wish fulfilled, the state, the character that has this thing, okay, instead of just thinking about having this thing. That is how you actually get specifically what you want without trying to get what you want. And that is also how you build momentum and keep momentum going. It's about embodiment of the state, okay? When you think of it, you should be pulled into it. You should be, right? You will have this kind of impulse. You will have this like inspirational feeling. But then that will wear off over time. You'll be placed into that state and you will feel yourself being pulled towards doing things differently without knowing. That's the unconscious process playing out. You know yourself to be different, okay? It's like if you've got, it's like if you've built $1 million business and it all just goes away overnight, right? You wake up and you're like, oh, let's get back to work, because that's who you are. you are the $1 million business owner. If you lost it overnight, you're going to get it back. You're going to get it back because that's who you are. That's who you're embodying, of course, unless you change how you feel, of course. But you're going to get straight back to doing that thing. So when you have these intuitive impulses to be driven into the world unconsciously, that means that you're embodying a state that's completely different. Of course, you don't always have to be driven into the world. That's not always the case. Sometimes you don't be driven into the world. Sometimes you be driven to do things that are different, or you stop doing things. Whatever it is. You show up differently and the world shows up differently accordingly, right? It's a conjugate principle. Remember how I was talking about how when you see the world around you having the abundance that you want, you don't have to try and feel it within yourself because it's already around you. It's already there. You're already associating and drawing meaning to it. Oftentimes this way, when we work with the corporeal identity to try and manifest things, we get stuck in these identifications and we completely miss the big picture. We almost forget who and what we are and what we're capable of. We don't have the ability to pull out. So here's another point. When you're in a dip, right? Because when you're doing these concept work, right, and you feel really, really good, you feel good for a couple of days, and then you have this dip, right? You're going to go up, and then you're going to go down. That's usually what people experience. Almost everybody I've coached with, they have this big peak. After a session, they have this big peak. Oh yeah, I feel inspired. I'm going to go and do this and that. And they may make some progress and things start happening. But then something happens. They either self-sabotage or some circumstance comes up or something happens, and then they go and they dip, right? And they're below their baseline level, right? They want to be up here, right? And they might have just briefly touched this feeling, but when they touched it, they didn't know how to continue doing that, right? And it's not like you can't stay there. You can, but the way that process works is that it's an unfolding cycle which will have its ups and its downs, right? Just like the self-recursive cycle, positive to negative charge polarity in comparison. So oftentimes these negative experiences are just the experience to purge bad phenomena, because it must be read. These negative field geometries must be input in order to be reprocessed and reassociated. That's why when you feel negative emotions and then you go all the way through, they go away because you've run all the way through that pathway and it's reached its end, right? But the difference is that you didn't change the association when you do that, because when you change the association, when you're doing these shadow work, when you're going into the darkness, the pits, the dips, if you wish, I call them the dips, the troughs, you go into these dark places that come up and you identify with them. You say, oh, I'm never going to get what I want. It doesn't work, because you're in the experience, right? You're identifying as false identification. You're experiencing the corporeal identity and you're forgetting that you are the source of emanation and you don't pull out. When you're in the dip and you can pull out and you can see, all right, my character is in a dip now. This is very important to understand, very important. When you're in a dip, you want to try, you need to build the habit of doing this, of course. Doing it the first time is not going to be easy because you're so used to doing it. But you pull out. You pull out and you say, all right, my character is in a dip. You may not say that, but you'll experience it in this way. You'll say, all right, I'm in a dip, and you'll feel different in that moment. You'll say, okay, well, this is what I'm working towards. This is where I'm at now. It's okay, I can feel whatever I want. I can feel whatever feelings come up. I can have whatever thoughts come up. I can have all of my thoughts and feelings, and it doesn't influence the direction that I'm going to be moving. That's just a temporary experience that my character is having that I don't need to identify with, because I am outside of that. I am above that, the higher self, right? That's what all of these ideas, you don't have another, multi-dimensional self that looks down from above from some higher perspective. No, it's just pulling the focus of your identification away and having the awareness of where you're at in order to refocus and re-level off that baseline level, that reference state. So you can then pull yourself back up to where you need to be and get back into a new high. So when you're actually in a dip and you can move this up, you're actually modulating the frequency that is already playing out in such a way where it shifts the baseline level that you're experiencing to be above where it previously was. And so when you get back into a peak, it's even higher than it was before. And so when you can build this momentum and have like the stair-step process, that's what it's like. It's like a stair-step process. You work from peak to trough to peak to trough to peak to trough. And when you go through these dips and you identify differently and consistently maintain faith in your end, that's what faith is all about. This whole idea of faith is really just about pulling out your identification and seeing, I'm in a dip, so what, big deal, I see my end, that's what I'm working toward. And when you stop caring about these dips and these spikes and you level off the state where your reference level is, where your coherency and where you want to be is the comparison, the contrast between the desired place and where you are now. When you level off, you will not care if you get it or not because you're already there. It's like when you've got something, like when you've got the phone that you're watching this on, or the computer that you're watching this on, or TV, or whatever device it is, right? You've got the device you're watching it on, you don't have any kind of ups or downs because you're already at the baseline level and you don't desire more or less. So your baseline level has leveled off, and your expectations, the contrast, there is no contrast because you're already there. When you stop caring about this thing, that's how you know you're at the point where you've already got it, because you're at the baseline level. And it's only then a matter of time, which of course time is just the process of self-recursive procession playing out. It doesn't matter how long it takes. There is no such thing as this time delay, because you're already at a place where you're satisfied. That's what satisfaction is. When you stop caring because your state has moved into a place where it's already at the reference level, where you don't need more. If you're above it, then you'll see it as like, who cares if I have it or not? It's one of those things. That's how you stop caring. That's how you stop attaching. That's how you stop wanting. When you have this reference level that you've moved yourself to, and this new identification, this new character, then that in comparison, the contrast between these will tell you where you're at. Okay, these dips, even if you have a dip, it'll still be above the reference level. And thus, it won't matter if you dip, because you're already at a place where it's already yours anyway, and you're already satisfied with your level of, having this thing. So it doesn't matter if you have it or not, because your satisfaction level is already at the point where crystallization is going to occur. So there's no need to worry, there's no need to fear, there's no need to doubt if you're not having the manifestation of this thing, if you're already satisfied. That's how you know if you've got it or not. When you stop caring about it. And especially if you stop caring about what other people think, you stop caring about circumstances, you stop caring about the conditions that you're holding against yourself. When you stop caring about all of these factors that previously you placed importance on and you put on the pedestal, that's when you know you're at the level of which you're above the desire. When you're above the desire, you have inevitability for it to show up, or something better will show up. That's another thing you got to understand, is that the desire does not always need to manifest. It does not always need to manifest for you to feel satisfied, because if that satisfaction is met, then who cares if the desire is there or not? You're already at a level of satisfaction. You don't need the desire. You've moved past the desire. Do you understand? Having $1,000 in a bank account for someone who's poor is a lot of money. Even a couple of $100. That's a level at which they would be satisfied. But when they get to that level, what's the next contrast? And remember I said the stair steps? The contrast and moving up between these stages, these reference stages, that is how you reach satisfaction. That is how you stop caring. That is how you stop attaching. That is how you stop having these false identifications and false meanings. You simply shift into a state where the reference level is already above the desire by feeling into that character, by simulating that experience in your mind, by changing the associations that you have to these concepts, the feelings. You understand? That's how it works. That's how you build reference state. And by getting into state streaks, you can actually consciously shift that up without needing to try and think about it. You're experiencing, you're being unconsciously driven in the world, but you're consciously recognizing that, and you can feel yourself moving above that reference level, in which case you will want more. You will see the next stage, and you will see that contrast, and you will perform these jumps. And you will have dips along the way, but the dips are way higher than the previous reference level. You see? It's up here now. So this level of satisfaction moves. Our desires are not permanent. Okay, you don't have divine desire. I'm sorry to say, you don't have divine desire. That is really stupid to think. Just like you don't have divine fears. You don't have any of this stuff. It's all self-recursive procession playing out. You do not have a soul, fundamental, core desire. Whatever, if you want to label it as. You don't have these ideas of fundamental desires. They don't come from the divine. There is no divine intelligence. The divine intelligence is the mechanics of reality. It is what you are. You are the process, the source of emanation, playing out self-recursively. Input, output, comparative analysis, leading to the generation of new phenomena that previously didn't exist. 2 points come together, consciously mediated to form something new. Do you understand? And so your identification with these phenomena that are unfolding, like a feedback loop that feeds itself, that's what self-recursive procession is. That's how you generate associations and desires, and that's also what determines your birth conditions and your death conditions. Because you associated meanings of these things and they carried over. So you don't have divine desires, you don't have any kind of karma that determined your birth conditions. That is simply the assumptions that you were holding that were previously carrying over. And just like the feeling manifests concepts in a way that does not conform to what you want, the feeling that you carry with you, the core identification, the characteristics, that will carry over and you will experience birth conditions according to that. Okay? And all of the people around you, they are the same way. They will experience the same phenomena because they are the same principle of self-recursive procession, a negatively entropic field geometry playing out within your field geometry. Okay? That's how you can warp them in your reality, because you are the primary circuit that is driving everybody else. It is up for debate if other people even technically have the ability to expand up to you, because it's a fractal representation. Every point on it has its own awareness, but exists within its own, field in and of itself. It's difficult to explain this stuff without drawing pictures, but technically everybody has the ability to influence everybody else, and yet you are also technically the primary driving force of your own experience. So we'll go into that in another video, but right now that's where I'm at with that idea. Just remember and understand that your identification, your character that you play as, and the point at which you desire something is met, the purpose behind that is to have that satisfaction. When you meet that level of desire, you've met that level of satisfaction by playing out and representing the feeling that it would be as if this was a thing that you actually already had. Just like you feel right now, you don't have any kind of emotional ups or downs, you don't have any kind of sensations in your body about having things that you have in the room, or what like I'm looking at this camera right now. I have this camera. I don't feel anxiety and I don't feel hype about having this camera. It doesn't make me angry. There's no association to it that is disproportionate to my reference level. I have it, it does its thing. Okay? Just like any other device or person in your life, or amount of money, or living in a certain location, whatever it is. If you desire something, then you will be moved towards that point because it is mediating you to reference level of charge. Okay? And when you are above it, you will either see it as something that you don't want, just like you don't see what I don't want $10 in my account the same way that a millionaire wouldn't want $100 in their account. It's just the comparison. It's just the contrast. There is no definitive meaning behind this stuff. It is the meaning that you associate to it. That is this contrast. The difference between them, the proportionality between them. That's how this works, okay? So it's all self-assembling, it's all self-referencing, it's all self-organizing. Your mind is a self-organizing, self-recursive circuit that knows how to sustain itself, okay? But the thing is that you're getting in the way. Your unconscious mind is doing exactly what it needs to do to get you to where you need to be. You're just getting in your own way. When you get out of your own way by not identifying and falsely identifying as the corporeal being who is having this up and down experience. Remember, you're not the corporeal identity. You are the source of emanation. You are the principle that drives these experiences. So when you understand that you are actually not the one suffering, but the identity is the one suffering, and when you abandon the self, the false identification, as Neville Goddard says, self-abandonment is the secret, right? When you abandon the false identification, the corporeal identification, that's the important thing to understand here. When you abandon the corporeal identity, the false identity, the characteristics of this suffering character that you've played as, when you abandon that and you see yourself as above it, it doesn't even have to be above it, you just see yourself as different from that. Then you can make change because you're in a new baseline state coherency. You've started generating a new coherency and a new state and a new character, which doesn't have these associations to it. Okay, you were almost freed from the burden of the corporeal identity in that experience. You're leaving the old character to burn. As I said, this channel, the tagline, burn away that which is not in order to reveal that which is. In other words, and all of the ancient spiritual texts were based on this. When you burn away corporeal identification, the only thing that is left when you pull out is the real, true core essence, the source of emanation, the I am, the uncaused cause, okay? The principle that you are, through which you then embody a characteristic and play as in the reality. When you play as these components, that build up your consciousness, then you actually have the experience of corporeal identification. That is why limitation is necessary, because without that you cannot have corporeal identification. So experience is not suffering. False identification is suffering. And when you learn to pull out of identification, when you learn to pull out of character, and you pull back into the components that you are, the self-recursive circuit that you are, then there's no suffering. There is no suffering because the frame of reference has changed. And when the frame of reference changes, then there's no suffering. There's no comparison. There's no contrast, because you then determine where the contrast is. It's about the unconscious aspect, how you are shifting between these levels and where your reference state is at. That's what determines your success. That's what determines what manifests. It's what you're being unconsciously driven towards. So the point of this is that the contrast that we have between things is what drives our desires, and without that, there is no way to manifest things that are different, because without that contrast, there is no comparison, there is no proportionality, there is no process that plays out that cycles between positive and negative polarities. Because false identification it's staying in the embodiment of suffering. Okay, I remember writing this on paper years ago, because I figured this out by studying the ancient spiritual texts ages ago. False identification equals suffering. I just explained why that is. Okay, even if you're in this bad place and you're affirming, I'm getting this, I'm getting this, I'm getting this, I'm getting this, and you do this panic of affirmation stuff that so many of these coaches talk about, which is nonsense. You will only manifest proof of that thing in a way that reflects that state and that feeling. I'm not saying you will not manifest proof of things, okay? When you think things, you manifest proof of things, but it manifests in a way that is limited, that is confirming your identification, without any shadow of a doubt. So we need to understand, we absolutely need to understand that concepts require association to feelings in order to have a place to be sorted in your field geometry, in your unconscious mind, for you to then experience as embodiment. Your embodiment matters the most, above all else. And you can pull that embodiment out and refocus it into something that is ideal, a reference state, for example. And that is the multiple levels of identification. That is how you experience the outer world as the inner world, by using various sensory perception, spatial sense projected out into reality, to then bring that to you without needing to do inner work. We always work with the opposite principles in reality synthesis, because we work with the nature of how things work. We use the principles of how reality works and what reality is and all of that stuff in order to bring about new experiences that we previously couldn't do with just our conscious mind. Because there is both the unconscious and the conscious mind coming together to form the subconscious mind. As you know, those who have listened to my stuff, the subconscious mind does not exist. Okay? The subconscious mind does not fundamentally exist. It is a product of the interaction of these two aspects. Just like electromagnetic induction does not exist without the dielectric and the magnetic fields coming together, phase cohering, and generating the phenomena of electromagnetism. There is no such thing as a third-rate product in and of itself, by itself, of itself. The principles come together and form new phenomena that previously did not exist. And thus we can explain how something comes from nothing, and how the whole idea of creationism doesn't work. Because nothing was created, everything already exists as potentials, concepts, feelings, and those feelings are just being modulated off of each other as the principles themselves. So we can explain how we go from nothing to everything, and how we can also reverse that and go from everything to nothing and back. So your birth conditions are this process playing out. They are fundamentally this process playing out that you already had integrated within you, right? The core themes and aspects and embodiments that you carried over from a previous iteration. I'm not going to say life, because it doesn't work like that. An iteration, a cycle, right? Everything is a cycle within a cycle within a cycle within a cycle. And all these other people represent cycles that are within you, okay? All aspects of experiences that you have within people in your life, they too are self-recursive circuits just like you. They are also self-recursive circuits like you are, that are integrated within cycles that you exist in. That is how you can control people and make them, do what you want. Of course, that's not from a manipulation perspective, but you can get contact from people without, telling them or trying to physically get them to do anything. It's not specifically just also thought transmission. There is valid physics that explains thought transmission, but we don't need that to explain it. We don't need longitudinal phase coherent propagations, superluminal propagations, to explain how this works. We can rely on the principles themselves because they are integrated within your circuitry. And like clockwork, when you change how the big gear shifts, all of the small gears change down the line, right? Cycles within cycles within cycles within cycles. So if you change the variability of a minute, the seconds will also change. An hour, the minutes change. The days, the hours change. You see? It's like a cascading effect. And so when you change your identification, you change the primary process through which these things play out as the state. Instead of focusing on the principles, as in the concepts themselves that you're trying to integrate, these little concepts have very little power to influence the big picture. When you change your identification, you're changing the big picture, which all of these smaller cycles are integrated within. You're changing everything by changing your identification, because that's what all of this stuff is integrated in. It's a hierarchic progression, okay? Process leads to proportion, well, it doesn't lead to proportionality, but process relies on proportionality to have a phenomena to exist within. So without that comparison, without that contrast, there cannot be comparison. There cannot be any kind of charged variability. There cannot be the measure of magnitude. Limitation of potential is the measurement of magnitude. It is the principle of proportionality. It's either disproportionate or proportionate, relating to where you want to be and where you are. And if that comparison is then aligned and phase coherent, then you experience it. You reach that point at which the pathways that you want, the state that you want, crystallizes and it becomes your primary dwelling state, as Neville Goddard talks about. When you change your identification, which is the state that you exist in, which is the primary dwelling state that it manifests what you are, what you don't manifest things specifically. You manifest identifications, but those identifications have within them concepts, things that you want. So instead of trying to manifest things and trying to manipulate reality from small little baby cycles, trying to influence this big giant gear that can't be changed with a small one, it has no influence. You're trying to change this huge, big, massively overpowered point of yourself from a little tiny, itty little, tiny point that has no influence. I have this, I have this, I have this, I have this, I am this, I am this, I am this, I am this. Good luck getting that the way you want. Good luck if you're just doing that purely on a conceptual level. If you can say that and embody the state that has that and consistently identifies that, as we've talked about in the video, and build state streaks and state coherency by playing as that character and by identifying as that character, especially when you're in the dips. Remember the dips, guys. The dips are very important. The thing that separates the master manifester from the newbie is how they identify with the dips. The master manifester sees the dips as beneficial to them. Even if it's negative in its experience, they still identify as if it's an inevitability for their end to come. They see it as proof that they're moving towards where they want to be. Because wherever there is a high, there is a low. But when we identify the low as a high, we shift that up. And so we stair step instead of going sideways. So instead of having this up and down where you don't really make any progress forward, you're actually having this stair step effect, where you're slowly working your way up. And as you continue to identify, you will automatically want to continue doing that stair step, because just like how you do what you do now, you will automatically be wanting to do this new thing from this new character anyway. You'll be automatically driven into the world differently without even realizing it, because you're being driven unconsciously. Everybody here is being driven unconsciously right now. If you think you're not being driven unconsciously, well, all of the habits that you do, all of the things that you do on a day-to-day basis, they are all you being unconsciously driven by processes that you've integrated with an identification that you primarily dwell as. Okay? Everybody's being driven unconsciously because that's how state coherency works. That's the point. We want to crystallize what we want so that we are then driven unconsciously, automatically, without needing to try and think about it. That's the point. Except most people miss that point because they think that everything needs to be done consciously. And they think that, and here's another really dumb idea. People always think that self-concept is what manifests this stuff. No, self-concept is changing identification. There is no such thing as self-concept. I know I have self-concept in some of my other videos as a title or something, but I'm only doing that because nobody really understands what I'm trying to talk about, right? If newbies come and hear state coherency, what do they, they don't know what that means. They don't have any kind of basis for what that really is all about. State coherency, by the way, if you haven't, understood what that means, is about how coherent a state is. It's how regulated the state is within itself. In other words, it's how self-sufficient that identification is without being drawn into other states. because states connect, of course. State interferometry. Go and watch the reality synthesis explains manifestation fully, or fully explains manifestation view. That goes into some stuff on state coherency and whatnot, and state interferometry and how states interfere and they interact. And when you can play as the primary state, it actually nullifies and dissolves resistances in other states automatically. You will experience those as one of the dips, but that dip is progress. So instead of identifying as the dip and then jumping into that other state and not actually building the coherency you want, you stay in the primary state, you have faith that that state is what you want, and you dissolve the resistance from that place. And you identify not with the dip, but with your end. And so you shift your baseline level up, and you have that warping effect. Where one day you'll just wake up and you'll be, oh, I want to be different. Like right now, today. I've done this, I've built some momentum over the last 2 days because I had a bit of a dip, right? And I'm like, all right, I'm in a dip, big deal. In fact, this is how I manifested the SP. I saw myself in the dip. And I thought, all right, I'm in a dip. So what? Big deal. They're still on their way. She's still on her way. I can't, there's nothing I can do to stop it. And within 2 days, poof, there it is. Never tried, I never continuously affirmed. It just showed up because I expected myself differently. I identified differently. I identified with the dip differently, primarily. That was really what the trick is. And this is what most people need to understand. When you're in this dip, it's not about identifying with the dip and seeing the negative circumstances as what they are and embodying the character who's in the dip. It's about pulling out and not embodying and not identifying. So when we say not identifying, it's about not embodying. It's about pulling out. It's about seeing yourself as not the corporeal identity. Okay, this is the primary thing. This is not really a thing you can do consciously. It's like a mixture of conscious and unconscious process. And when you get good at it, you'll actually begin to see yourself or feel this difference in perspective, right? You will get to know how to pull out of embodiment. You will be able to pull out of the embodiment of that state. And you will become the I am, right? The corporeal identity will no longer be your embodied place. You'll be pulled out of that. And you'll be able to have a frame of reference from which you can see what you're experiencing as just the dip, instead of seeing it as, a bad thing and something to be worried about and experience, and all of the things that break faith. Having faith is not about continuously telling yourself about your end. It's about embodiment. Embodiment is the trick, okay? Embodiment is the secret behind how it is that you actually change identification. Because changing identification is not a conscious but an unconscious phenomenon. You use your conscious mind to change your unconscious mind, because your conscious mind is the only one that fundamentally has free will. But your unconscious mind follows where the conscious mind goes. So when you give it that impulse and you follow through with that and you pull out and you pull into the state that you want, and you work from that place, and you consciously have, all right, I'm being driven here, I'm going to continue to work from this. Just like when you're in a dip, okay, I'm in a dip, I'm going to disassociate and I'm going to pull into the state that I do want. It's the same process. That's how you use your free will. That's how you use your conscious mind. You think less, or you think more efficiently. We can say that. You think more efficiently. Thinking more efficiently is what we want to be doing here. We don't want to be thinking more, we want to be thinking more efficiently to make better use of our conscious mind, instead of just wasting conscious energy trying to think of things that don't really serve us, and embodying in states that are incoherent and have all these concepts all over the place. In fact, that's highly damaging, right? When you're doing this, you're integrating concepts who knows where. In all these different states, when you're in this negative state, you're integrating the concepts. And so when you do want this concept, you're going to have associations to this state, and you're going to have memories from this state that you don't want, that you're going to need to resolve. So you're building coherency in states that you don't want by continuously doing repetitive affirmations and sats, scenes and all this stuff when you're in bad places, right? You don't want to be doing that. You want to pull out. You want to pull out identification, and you want to go into reference state, and you simply want to see, even if you're having negative emotions, and even if you're having some negative thoughts come up, big deal. It doesn't matter, right? Because you're pulling out. You're pulling the embodiment out of that, and you're disassociating meaning to it. You're pulling the context away from that, and you're reassociating context into the ideal state. That's what we want to be doing. We don't want to be associating and embodying that place. We want to change the character that we embody. And thus, by changing the character that we embody, we change how it is that we associate meaning to the things that we experience. Because the meaning that we place on things is really what matters. That's the real secret. The feeling and the concept together create context, which is basically meaning, which then forms identification, and then identifications form states, and states are basically characters that we embody. States are coherent forms of both identifications and concepts and feelings as contexts and meanings that we embody and play out. And so when we can pull out of that and we can shift into a new state, then we no longer embody and identify and feel into those old states, and thus we build momentum in a new direction. That's what having faith is all about fundamentally. It's about seeing that state, that character, that embodiment, that end, as inevitable, not from the perspective of the embodiment of the flawed character who doesn't have what they want, their corporeal identity, who is limited, but from the perspective of the I am. The I am is the source of emanation, the principle which gives life to identifications, and thus the meaning, and thus the manifestations that come through. I think that's about it. I could probably talk more, but any more and it would just make this video too long. So I'm going to let you guys take notes on what I just said. I wanted to write stuff on the whiteboard, but I just wanted to do a free talking video today. I've got the new studio lights up here as well. So we've got better lighting in the room. We don't have to use the window anymore. It's going to be great. We're going to have all sorts of new content coming out in Reality Synthesis. So subscribe and stay tuned. Like and share the videos as always. And as I always say, stay legendary.